The shelter was silent that night, except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint rattle of metal bars when the wind slipped through the cracks. In the last row of kennels, pressed so tightly into the shadows he seemed almost part of the wall, a German shepherd waited. His fur was dull, his ribs sharp, his breath shallow. He didn't bark like the others. He didn't even lift his head when strangers walked past. He had learned silence was safer. Every time footsteps echoed down the corridor, he flinched. Hands had reached for him before, but they always withdrew. To him, the bars weren't protection, they were a sentence. His eyes, though dim, carried stories of nights spent in the cold, of hunger clawing at his belly, of voices shouting and doors slamming. And then, one evening, a hand didn't withdraw. It lingered. Gentle fingers curled through the cold steel, trembling slightly as if carrying their own fear. The dog froze. The air seemed to pause. For the first time in years, his body tensed not in defense, but in the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this touch was different. But hope was dangerous. Hope had broken him before. The story begins in the dim light of the shelter's back corridor, where cages are stacked in endless rows. Most dogs bark, their cries echoing through the hollow concrete walls. But one kennel remains hauntingly silent. In its farthest corner lies a German shepherd, his frame hunched tight, as though trying to disappear into the shadows. His coat is dull, his ribs visible, and his eyes carry the vacant glaze of a soul that has retreated inward. Unlike the others, he doesn't rise when footsteps approach. Instead, he trembles, pressing himself deeper into the cold floor. Volunteers pass by daily, murmuring sympathetic words, but no one stops for long. They whisper that he is shut down, a dog broken beyond repair. His file tells pieces of his story. Abandoned by a family who moved away, left chained in a yard through rain and scorching heat, until neighbors finally reported him. When the shelter van picked him up, he didn't resist. He simply walked forward, as though resistance had been drained from his bones long ago. But the past isn't just written in paperwork. It lives in the flicker of his eyes when a hand raises too quickly. It lingers in his refusal to touch food when anyone is near. His world has shrunk to silence and survival, and the corner of his kennel is the last piece of ground he trusts. Then, one evening, a stranger enters. Unlike the others, he doesn't move fast or try to coax the dog with cheerful words. He kneels quietly outside the kennel, lowering himself to the shepherd's level, his voice soft as falling rain. He speaks not to pull the dog closer, but simply to be heard. Something in the air shifts. The shepherd doesn't respond. His body remains stone still, but his eyes flicker. A heartbeat of recognition passes. And yet, as quickly as it comes, it fades. The man rises, promising softly, "I'll be back." The shepherd stays frozen, unsure if the words mean anything. He's heard promises before, and they all dissolved into absence. The chapter closes on that image. The dog in his corner of shadows, the man's voice fading down the corridor, and a fragile silence that feels just a little less empty.
The stranger returns, not once, not twice, but every day. The shelter staff watch with quiet curiosity. Most adopters walk the rows once, maybe twice, and move on when a dog shows no sign of interest, but this man doesn't leave. He comes in the morning before work, sits cross-legged by the kennel, and simply talks. Sometimes he reads aloud from a book. Sometimes he just hums under his breath. Days stretch into weeks, and though the shepherd never approaches, something subtle begins to change. At first, the dog trembles less when the man's footsteps echo down the hall. His ears twitch at the sound of his voice. His breathing doesn't quicken with fear as it once did. Still, the gulf between them feels vast, a canyon carved by years of neglect and broken trust. One morning, the man brings a small piece of chicken. He sets it gently on the floor, not inside the kennel, but just beyond the bars, and waits. Hours pass, and the shepherd doesn't move. The food is untouched. The man leaves it there when he goes, whispering, "Maybe tomorrow." It takes 5 days before the chicken disappears. The staff assume another dog must have snatched it, but the man notices the faintest grease stain on the shepherd's muzzle. His heart stirs with hope. Then comes the turning point. The man extends his hand through the bars, not with food this time, but empty, vulnerable. The shepherd stiffens. His body tenses as memories flood back, rough hands jerking chains, voices that shouted, the sting of abandonment. For a breathless moment, the man's fingers hover inches away from sharp teeth. But the bite never comes. The shepherd doesn't retreat either. He just stares. And in that stare, something wordless passes between them. Not trust yet, not forgiveness, but recognition. The man whispers again, softer this time, almost like a prayer. "I'm not leaving you." The chapter ends on that suspended note. The shepherd frozen in indecision, the man's hand trembling but steady, and the unspoken question lingering in the stillness. Will this fragile moment hold, or will it shatter like every hope before?
The adoption papers are signed, but survival is not guaranteed. The German shepherd's body is frail, his weight dangerously low. His fur hides wounds beneath, scars of untreated infections and months of malnutrition. At the veterinary clinic, the man sits rigid in the waiting room as the doctor speaks carefully. If he doesn't start eating properly soon, he may not make it. The words cut through him like cold steel. The days that follow are a fight. The shepherd refuses food, his distrust running deeper than hunger. The man tries everything, hand-feeding, warming broth, gentle coaxing, but bites go uneaten. Each refusal feels like the animal's spirit is slipping further away. There are small victories. One night, the dog laps water from a bowl while the man sits quietly across the room, not watching. Another morning, he takes 3 bites of boiled chicken before retreating again. These moments are like flickers of light in a collapsing tunnel, enough to keep the man going. But the setbacks are brutal. One evening, the shepherd collapses suddenly, his legs folding beneath him. Panic surges. The man rushes to the emergency vet, heart hammering, whispering desperate words into the silent car. The vet administers fluids, checks vitals, warns again. His body is fighting, but it's fragile. We have to keep him stable. For a long night, the shepherd lies motionless, breathing shallowly under the glow of sterile lights. The man doesn't leave his side. He sits on the cold floor, head in his hands, every breath synced with the rise and fall of the dog's chest. Each pause feels endless. Each exhale feels like a borrowed miracle. By dawn, the dog stirs weakly. His eyes open, and for the first time, instead of turning away, they land on the man, a frail, fragile gaze that lingers for just a second longer than before. It's not trust yet, but it's a signal. He hasn't given up. Not yet. The chapter closes on that fragile spark, hovering between life and loss.
The shepherd survives, but healing is slow and uneven. His body gains strength little by little, yet his spirit still trembles. Loud sounds send him cowering into corners. A raised hand, even in kindness, makes him flinch. At night, he paces restlessly, caught in dreams that make him whimper and jolt awake. The man learns patience like a second language. He never forces touch. He never raises his voice. Instead, he builds a routine that the shepherd can cling to, meals at the same time each day, soft walks in quiet fields, a bed placed beside his own so the dog never feels alone in the dark. There are setbacks. A slammed door sends the shepherd retreating under the table for hours. A visiting friend's laughter makes him shake uncontrollably. Each time, the man sits near, silent, reminding him he doesn't have to return to shadows alone. But there are breakthroughs, too. A morning when the shepherd steps out of his crate without coaxing. An evening when he nudges the man's hand instead of shrinking away. The greatest moment comes one rainy afternoon. The shepherd hesitates, then slowly places his paw into the man's open hand. A simple gesture, yet monumental, a silent vow that he's beginning to trust. The chapter ends with that fragile image, paw resting in hand, rain tapping softly against the window, and the quiet knowing that the hardest walls are beginning to crack.
By now, the shepherd is unrecognizable from the ghost who once hid in the shelter's corner. His coat shines with health, his body carries weight again, and his eyes no longer look through people, but into them. But healing scars does not erase them. Trust is not absolute. Some nights, shadows still make him pace, and sudden sounds still make him cower. Yet the difference now is profound. He no longer faces these storms alone. The man brings him home for good, and the house becomes a place of transformation. Rugs replace cold concrete. A backyard becomes his new kingdom. Each blade of grass a miracle under his paws. The shepherd learns to rest on the couch, head tilted against the man's lap, his chest rising and falling in rhythms of peace he never knew before. The climax arrives one quiet evening. The man is sitting on the floor, sorting through old papers, when the shepherd approaches unbidden. Slowly, silently, he presses his head into the man's chest. It is not fear, it is surrender. It is love. Tears come uninvited, falling onto fur that once shivered at the lightest touch. The resolution ripples beyond them both. This is no longer just a story about one dog's survival. It's about resilience itself, the human capacity to stay, the animal's courage to trust again, and the reminder that brokenness can be mended when patience becomes love. The final scene lingers on an image, the shepherd asleep by the fire, the man's hand resting gently on his back, and silence that no longer feels empty but whole. A voice, soft and reflective, closes the story with a universal truth. Sometimes the ones who hide deepest in the shadows are only waiting for a hand steady enough to reach through the bars and never let go. The chapter ends, and with it the story, on that image of quiet, steadfast hope.